The night pressed down with a weight that felt heavier than the gear strapped across the backs of the SEAL team. Darkness stretched across the valley like a thick, unbroken curtain, swallowing sound, movement, and breath. The world seemed suspended in that silence, a silence so deep it almost rang in the ears. Not even the crickets dared to sing. Not even the wind stirred the dry brush scattered across the slope. It was the kind of silence that soldiers knew well, the kind that didn't comfort but warned, a silence that lived right before the storm. The team had been in position for hours, bodies melded into the earth, rifles steady, scopes glinting only for the faintest second whenever the moon's edge slipped between clouds. They waited, breathing slow, eyes unblinking, every muscle coiled with the discipline of men trained to vanish into the night. Each sniper lay prone in the dirt, heartbeat slowed, their minds sharp with the anticipation of the first signal. They had studied the terrain, measured the distances, calibrated their scopes down to the grain of sand. Every possible calculation had been rehearsed, every angle memorized. From the ridge to the valley floor stretched a killing ground that should have been theirs. The enemy was moving through, not in haste, but with the confident swagger of men who thought they owned the night. And yet, for all the preparation, for all the stillness, something was wrong. The silence was not the quiet of advantage. It was the quiet of hesitation, the quiet of dread. The squad leader shifted slightly, his hand giving a coded signal. Targets had entered the zone. They were silhouetted faintly, shadows against shadows, but they were there. Rifles raised, safeties clicked, the familiar weight of the trigger settled under their fingers. Breath in, hold, exhale halfway, every sniper's ritual. And then, like ghosts, the enemy advanced. Boots touched gravel, shoulders brushed against branches, the kind of sounds that carried louder than they should when the rest of the night was frozen. They were close enough now that their voices floated up in low murmurs, a language thick with tension, but carried carelessly. The first shot cracked, sharp, disciplined, clean. A flash, then recoil, then nothing. The shot had missed. It didn't even make sense. These men didn't miss. Their records didn't allow for mistakes. But the target stumbled forward untouched, his comrades unaware, and the silence grew heavier. Another shot, then another, miss again. The night that should have been cut open by precision and finality instead echoed with failure. Muzzle flashes bloomed and died in vain, the bullets tearing into dirt, into bark, into air, but never into flesh. The SEAL team's breathing quickened. In the headsets, there was no chatter, no excuses, just the weight of disbelief. Their scopes fogged with doubt, their fingers trembled against the triggers. What had happened to their training? To their certainty? Shots that should have ended the fight before it began turned into ghosts themselves, vanishing into the night as if swallowed by some invisible force. The enemy hadn't noticed, not yet, but their approach continued, step after step, the sound of boots grinding against gravel louder, closer, merciless. The snipers adjusted, recalibrated, drew on every ounce of calm they had drilled into their bodies. Again, a shot cut through the silence, and again, it was nothing but empty air. Shadows shifted, but none fell. Each man on the ridge could feel it now, the unraveling, the way control slipped from their grasp like water through their fingers. Their vantage point, their superior training, their hidden positions, none of it mattered if the rifles betrayed them. They were ghosts firing at shadows, warriors stripped of their deadliest edge. The enemy squad advanced steadily, unaware they had walked through what should have been a wall of death. The SEAL team lay frozen in disbelief, unable to trust their own eyes, their own hands, their own weapons. The silence deepened again, not the silence of waiting this time, but the silence of fear. A silence that whispered louder than gunfire ever could. Something had gone wrong, terribly wrong, and no one knew why. The enemy squad pushed forward with the kind of determination that only comes from numbers and confidence. Their boots struck the ground in rhythm, crunching gravel, snapping twigs, breaking the fragile quiet that had held the valley only moments before. Every step carried a weight, a sound too heavy for the stillness of night. They weren't creeping like prey. They were advancing like hunters, their silhouettes growing larger, closer, sharper against the faint silver glow of a cloud-fractured moon. The air carried the muted rustle of fabric, the metallic clink of weapons brushing against gear, the occasional whisper barked in a foreign tongue. Each sound seemed to echo against the valley walls, spreading outward, filling the emptiness with a pulse of encroaching danger. They moved in formation, loose but deliberate, a squad drilled for combat. Some spread wide, cutting through the brush at the edges, their outlines barely distinguishable from the jagged lines of the terrain. Others pressed through the center, rifles at the ready, eyes scanning for threats that might emerge from the darkness. Their leader marched near the middle, shoulders square, head jerking occasionally to issue commands with the sharp efficiency of someone who had walked these routes before. They weren't rushing, and they weren't careless. They moved with the kind of steadiness that spoke of confidence in their strength and certainty that any resistance would fall before them. From the ridge above, the SEAL team watched as the squad grew nearer. What should have been easy targets, lit faintly by the shifting beams of moonlight, had somehow turned into a nightmare of missed opportunities. Every failed shot haunted the silence. Every missed mark allowed the enemy to close more ground. The valley that had been an advantage now seemed like a trap, the distance shrinking, the margin for error collapsing with each advancing step. The enemy did not know they had already walked through a barrage of invisible failure. Their movements carried no fear, no hesitation, only purpose. The crunch of their boots grew sharper. Loose stones slid down slopes as they climbed. One figure stopped, crouched low, and pointed toward the ridge as if sensing something hidden. Another raised a hand in signal, and the squad adjusted their path, tightening, drawing closer together, more coordinated now, as though preparing for an encounter they expected but could not yet see. Shadows stretched long, distorted by the moonlight breaking through scattered clouds, and for a moment, their outlines looked less human and more like looming shapes advancing with unstoppable momentum. The valley air thickened with the weight of their presence. Breaths quickened, muscles tightened, and the sound of fabric brushing against fabric joined the rhythm of boots and weapons. Rifles swung in arcs, sweeping the darkness, covering every direction. Their discipline was clear. This was no wandering patrol. This was a squad with intent, men who had marched through fire before and who carried themselves as if the night itself was under their control. Each step brought them closer to the ridge where the SEAL team lay hidden, their bodies blending into dirt and rock, their weapons trembling from disbelief more than from the weight of steel. The squad closed the gap with a predator's patience, never rushing, never faltering. Their whispers carried upward, snippets of orders, the clipped tone of soldiers who knew their roles well. The closer they drew, the more their presence seemed to press down like a physical force. The silence of the ridge was no longer dominant. It was being swallowed, piece by piece, by the advancing tide of noise and movement. The world that had belonged to the watchers now seemed to belong to the watched, the men below dictating the rhythm, the pace, the inevitable collision to come. Each second stretched longer, each step louder, until the squad was no longer distant shadows, but figures clear enough to trace with a finger. The line between hunter and hunted blurred as the squad's boots carried them relentlessly forward, their formation tightening, their weapons gleaming faintly in the broken light. The push was steady, unstoppable, the sound of their advance resonating through the valley as though even the earth acknowledged their approach. The enemy pressed closer, with nothing in their stride to suggest they feared the ridge above or the unseen eyes locked on them. The mission teetered on the edge of collapse, balanced in that fragile space between control and chaos where a single misstep could unravel everything. Hours of planning, days of reconnaissance, and the weight of expectations, all of it hung suspended in the thick, tense air. What was meant to be a perfectly executed strike had begun to unravel in the most unexpected way. The snipers had missed, not once, but repeatedly, and with each wasted shot the window of certainty grew narrower. Every man on the ridge could feel it, the creeping chill of failure wrapping around their throats. The kind of chill that gnaws at discipline, that eats away at confidence, that makes even the most seasoned soldier question whether the mission could still be salvaged. The silence in their comms told its own story. Normally, even in the tightest operations, there would be brief confirmations, whispered reassurances, coded signals of precision. Now there was nothing, just the shallow sound of breath, the occasional rustle of cloth against dirt as a body shifted slightly, the oppressive weight of disbelief pressing down on every man. Their crosshairs had failed them. Their calculations had crumbled, and the enemy squad was advancing steadily as if fate itself had chosen to mock the SEAL's reputation. The mission, once a promise of clean execution, had become a question with no clear answer. From the vantage point above, the SEALs could see the valley for what it was, an open door for the enemy, a corridor they were supposed to close forever. That door now yawned wider with each step the squad took. The plan had been simple in its precision. Eliminate the threat before it crossed the kill zone. Keep the mission silent, and leave no trace behind. But with the enemy still standing, still pressing forward, the simplicity had shattered. What remained was chaos, a landscape where time ticked faster, the margin for recovery shrinking to nothing. The squad leader felt the weight most heavily. His mind raced through contingencies, recalculations, desperate fragments of possibility. There were protocols for missed shots, for adjustments, for fallback plans. But this creeping paralysis of an entire sniper line, was not in the manual. He clenched his jaw, his hands tight against his rifle, searching for any thread of control to seize. The enemy had not yet reacted, but every heartbeat brought them closer to the ridge, closer to discovery, closer to tearing the operation apart. The valley seemed to shrink as the enemy pressed onward. Their boots struck the ground with the authority of inevitability. Each crunch of gravel was another reminder that the mission was slipping further from the SEALs' hands. The squad's discipline held them still, but beneath the surface their nerves were fraying. A sniper without accuracy is no sniper at all, and yet here they were, trained killers reduced to helpless watchers. The mission they had sworn to complete felt like sand sliding between clenched fingers, impossible to hold, impossible to stop. The night itself seemed to sense the collapse. Clouds drifted to blot out the moon, smothering the faint light that had once revealed targets. The darkness grew heavier, thicker, and with it came the crushing weight of uncertainty. Every sound carried farther. Every motion felt exaggerated. The balance of power had shifted, subtle but undeniable, as the hunters became men waiting to be exposed. The line between success and disaster narrowed to the thinnest thread, and each breath felt like it could snap it entirely. Still, they waited, trapped in that limbo where action could destroy them as easily as inaction. The mission had become a fragile shell, hollowed out by failure, threatening to collapse at the slightest touch. The valley floor stretched beneath them as both opportunity and curse. The squad advanced, oblivious, but their presence was no longer something to be controlled. It was something to be endured, something that might at any moment turn the hunters into prey. The mission trembled at the edge of collapse, a fragile balance holding for seconds that felt like years, each moment carrying the weight of everything that had gone wrong. She rose against all odds, the kind of rise that doesn't begin with strength, but with necessity. For a long moment, she had been just another figure among the team, silent, still, a shadow blended into the earth like the others. But as the silence of failure stretched longer and the enemy's footsteps grew heavier, something inside her refused to stay pressed against the dirt. The missed shots still rang in her ears, the disbelief of trained snipers stripped bare of their precision. Every heartbeat felt like thunder, every exhale like a betrayal of her hiding place. Yet, beneath all of it, she knew the truth that no one else would accept. If she did not act, the mission was over. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of what she was about to do. The ridge felt like a coffin, a place where hesitation would bury them alive. Around her, the SEALs remained frozen, their scopes useless, their confidence shattered by the impossible streak of misses. She looked at them, not with judgment, not with blame, but with the sharp clarity of someone who saw the crack in the wall and knew she had to step through it. She was not supposed to be the one. She wasn't the leader of this team, nor the one with the most kills on record. But sometimes the night chooses someone, not because they are destined, but because no one else will rise. The dirt pressed into her palms as she pushed herself up slowly, the world around her seeming to pause in disbelief at the movement. It was a dangerous gesture, one that risked everything they had been trained to avoid: visibility, exposure, vulnerability. The ridge was supposed to be a veil, not a stage. But in that moment, She stepped onto it willingly. The wind tugged faintly at her hair, the fabric of her uniform whispering against her skin as she broke free of the ground's embrace. Rising was not just physical. It was a declaration, silent but undeniable, that the mission was hers now. Her eyes locked onto the advancing squad below. They moved like a tide, steady, relentless, unaware that their approach was being rewritten by a single act of defiance. She felt the weight of her weapon in her hands, not as an extension of training, but as a burden she now had to carry alone. The air was thick, every breath a test of her resolve, every beat of her heart a reminder of how fragile the balance truly was. And yet, in her rising, something shifted, not in the enemy, not in the terrain, but in her. The fear that gripped the others did not vanish, but it was harnessed, molded into focus sharper than steel. Her silhouette broke the ridge line, a shape that could no longer hide in shadows. If the enemy looked up, if they caught even a glimpse, it would be over. But she did not flinch. She leveled her weapon, her stance steady, her body aligning with a conviction that had been forced into her by failure all around her. Against all odds, she stood because sitting meant death, lying down meant surrender, waiting meant collapse. The valley below seemed to breathe differently now, as though it too recognized the shift. The enemy squad pressed forward, their movements careless in their confidence, their formation steady in its rhythm. None of them knew that the balance had changed. None of them knew that a single figure had risen, not with the certainty of success, but with the refusal to accept failure. She felt the weight of their lives on her shoulders, the team behind her, the mission itself, and the shadow of every missed shot that had brought them to this moment. Rising was not courage. It was desperation. It was resolve forged in the cracks of broken plans and missed opportunities. It was the body refusing to stay down when the mind whispered that staying down was safer. She stood where no one else could, her breath sharp in the night, her weapon steady, her presence undeniable. Against all odds, she rose, and in her rising the night itself seemed to pause, holding its breath for what would come next. One fighter, one decisive stand. That was all it came down to in the end, stripped of strategy, stripped of precision plans, stripped of the overwhelming force that was supposed to crush the enemy before they even realized they had been marked. The team lay scattered across the ridge, silent, paralyzed by disbelief and failure, but she was no longer part of that stillness. She had stepped into a place where hesitation could not follow. The battlefield did not care about ranks, reputations, or past victories. It cared only about the present, about the figure who chose to act when everyone else faltered. And in that valley, beneath the weight of night and the slow march of approaching boots, she chose her stand. Her rifle was steady now, steadier than it had ever been during training, steadier than the trembling uncertainty that had stolen accuracy from the snipers around her. Her pulse no longer thundered wildly, but fell into rhythm with the moment. Each inhale, each exhale, each tightening of her grip felt synchronized with a destiny she had not asked for but could no longer avoid. She was the one who had risen, the one who had placed herself in the line of sight, the one who had broken the rules of concealment in order to rewrite the rules of survival. Below her, the enemy squad pressed forward, their formation sharp, their confidence unshaken. They had no idea how close they were to changing the course of everything. To them, the night was theirs. To them, the ridge above was nothing but terrain, dirt and stone and shadow. They moved with the kind of assurance that comes only from experience, the certainty that they had faced worse and survived. But what they did not know was that the valley had narrowed into a stage, and at its center stood one figure who would not let them pass unchallenged. She adjusted her sight, but it was not calculation alone that guided her. Numbers, distances, wind corrections, all of that had meaning. But tonight it was more than mathematics. It was instinct, raw and sharpened by the fire of necessity. Her finger hovered, then settled against the trigger, not in hesitation but in readiness. The team around her had failed, not because they lacked skill, but because fate had chosen to bend the laws of certainty against them. She refused to bow to the same fate. One fighter was all that remained between collapse and survival, and she was willing to carry the weight of that truth. The night pressed tighter. Every sound from the enemy squad seemed louder. The scrape of metal against fabric, the low murmur of voices, the grinding crunch of boots against stone. Each detail etched itself into her awareness. Each sound a countdown to the point where the enemy would be too close to stop. She had no luxury of waiting, no second chance if she faltered. The stand she was about to make would decide everything in a heartbeat. Her mind cleared. Doubt fell away, leaving only the cold clarity of action. The memory of missed shots, the disbelief of her team, the suffocating silence. All of it faded as her focus narrowed to a single, unavoidable truth. She was the fighter the moment demanded, the blade the mission required, the stand that could not be avoided. Against overwhelming odds, against the creeping tide of failure, against the relentless advance of men who thought the night belonged to them, she became the resistance. One fighter, one stand. The odds did not matter anymore. The numbers did not matter anymore. The only thing that mattered was the choice to face the impossible head-on. Her body was still, her weapon aligned, her will unbroken. The decisive moment had arrived, and she was the only one left willing to meet it. The entire enemy squad was eliminated, but not in the way anyone would have expected when the mission first began. What should have been the quiet work of multiple rifles striking in perfect unison had crumbled into silence and missed opportunities. Yet in that collapse, a single figure had stepped forward, carrying the burden of what an entire team could not deliver. One fighter against many, one decision standing against inevitability, one rifle turned into the sharp edge that cut through the night. The squad below had no idea that their march into the valley would end in absolute destruction, not by the hands of a coordinated line of SEALs, but by one lone figure who refused to let failure take root. The fight itself unfolded in bursts, the sharp crack of controlled fire echoing through the valley like thunder tearing apart the silence. Each shot now carried weight. Each shot carried intent. They were not the scattered misses that had come before, not the wasted streaks of light that vanished into the dirt. These were precise, unforgiving, final. The enemy moved in confidence, but confidence is no shield when the air itself turns against you. One by one, they stumbled, their momentum broken, their formation fracturing as the invisible hand of death reached out from the ridge above. The squad leader barked orders, his voice sharp and commanding, but even command could not restore order when men were dropping around him. Their heads snapped upward, their rifles swung toward the ridge, and confusion rippled through their ranks. They had walked into what should have been a trap hours ago, but only now did the trap finally spring. Panic is a strange thing. It spreads faster than bullets. It unravels discipline. It tears apart even the strongest of units. And panic had begun to bloom in their eyes as shadows of their comrades collapsed into the dirt. She remained steady, untouched by the chaos she had unleashed. Her rifle spoke in rhythm, not rushed, not frantic, but deliberate, unyielding. Each pull of the trigger was another line etched into the night, another life cut short, another step closer to erasing the thread entirely. She did not think of herself as the savior in that moment, nor did she dwell on the impossibility of what she was doing. She acted because there was no alternative. Every shot that struck its mark was not victory. It was survival. It was necessity. It was the only path left open. The squad below scattered, instincts pushing them to dive for cover, to find angles of protection where none truly existed. Some tried to fire back, flashes bursting from their rifles in desperate arcs. Bullets cracked against stone, dirt erupted around the ridge, but none of it touched her. She moved with the rhythm of inevitability, shifting from target to target with the kind of focus that erased fear. The ridge that had once seemed like a coffin became her fortress, her vantage, her platform of retribution. The air was filled with sound now, shouts of alarm, the frantic scrape of boots against rock, the ringing echoes of gunfire colliding in the valley. But no matter how loudly the enemy fought, the outcome had already been sealed the moment she chose to stand. One by one, their voices went silent. One by one, their rifles fell quiet. The squad that had entered the valley with confidence and strength found themselves torn apart, undone by a force they could not anticipate, a lone figure whose willpower turned the impossible into fact. The valley itself bore witness. Where silence had once suffocated, now the ground was littered with the remnants of a squad that had marched too far, too certain, too unaware of the stand awaiting them above. The echoes of gunfire rolled away, dissolving into the night air, leaving behind only the heavy stillness of an ending written not by numbers, but by one relentless fighter. The entire enemy squad was eliminated, not by overwhelming power, not by flawless coordination, but by the unyielding resolve of one who refused to let the mission fall.